How do you define motivation?
It has two main functions. First, you have like the environment or the context. It makes behavior available. That represents the stimuli that could discriminate behavior. The second part of the context now becomes
We are being joined by the great and wise Dr. Trevor Kashey. He's a person who has changed my thinking.
I rely almost exclusively on what I call awareness. My high-fiving raises the probability of exercising again the next day.
What do you see as some of the potential downsides of shift work just from a health perspective?
In the plainest ways possible, kind of confuses your...
How do you define motivation?
So it has two main functions for me. First, you have like the environment or the context in which you behave. And the environmental context does two main functions. It makes behavior available, as in like you enter a room and you could do any number of things in that room. So that represents all of the stimuli in that room that could discriminate behavior. And discriminate means eliminate all the other stuff. So in behavior land, they call it a discriminative stimulus, which means when presented with this thing, all the options for all other behaviors go away because it discriminates for a particular behavior. Okay, so like when you tell a dog to sit, it sits, and it only sits when you tell it to sit because sit has now come under stimulus control. So when I make that noise now eliminates all other options and makes the sitting behavior the only option. Okay. The second part of the context now becomes the value component. Value has a bunch of different meanings, but basically you have what behaviors do we have available to emit, and then which things make those change the probability of any of those behaviors emitting. And that probability part with respect to the context, by and large, defines motivation.
Okay.
So for instance, like I have cereal in my pantry right now. I give two craps about that cereal, even though I can eat it at any time. But as soon as milk appears in the fridge, I now care about that cereal. And so from my analytical perspective, that makes milk a motivating operation.
Okay.
Yep. So motivation gets where they think of it as something internal, but I see it as like, well, when milk appears, cereal becomes valuable. Therefore, milk motivates cereal eating.
And
does that make sense?
The probability that you will eat the cereal.
Yeah, exactly. Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And so other things affect the probability as well. But by and large, you have, do you have a behavior available? And then which aspects of the environment, latent or ongoing, latent or current, or I would say latent or presenting more specifically, make the value of the outcome of performing that behavior high. So motivation, to round it out, a motivator makes the outcome value higher rather than the behavior's value higher.
Okay, this feels very useful for people who read 2%. Apply this to when we think of like motivation to exercise. Say I'm the average person. I go, I need to get more motivated to exercise.
Yes.
I'm just going to go with that.
Yeah, generally speaking, when I think we say language, say words like that, we tend to think of it as like, I want a reason to do it, or I want somebody to hold me accountable for doing it, which often means like punishing me if I don't. It means that like it gets into this interesting, I would say, mess of wantingness. Because like, again, even defining wanting becomes very difficult if you actually think about what that means. So I would say I like to lean on behavior economics for stuff like this, or like you have a bunch of different things you could do. And so wanting to exercise or motivation to exercise effectively means under what conditions does the outcome of exercising overpower the outcome of doing anything else in particular right now? And that takes a lot of organizing, which we tend to call self-control, self-regulation, whatever you want to call it. And in the shortest answer looks like the motivation to exercise stays low because the motivation to do other things stays higher. And looking at things with respect to an open system versus a closed system. So a lot of people talk about what they do as if they operate in a closed system. I change this one thing and that one thing changes, and now I can predict and control what I do. The making exercise interesting, by and large, means making other things less interesting or more difficult to access. Now that, again, that sounds kind of harsh, but I would say, like, if you sit in a padded, if you just sit in a completely white room and a black spot appears on one of the walls, where do you stare?
The black spot.
At the white spot, right? In any other situation, nobody gives two craps about the black spot that appears. But because that black spot becomes your only attentional option, that black spot now becomes interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And now take that room and fill it with 100 gajillion other things. What grabs your attention now becomes what has the highest immediate value after performing the activity.
Mm-hmm.
And that means to make exercise per se more interesting or getting more motivating to do it, you have a couple of options from a coaching perspective. A lot of it comes down to lowering the cost of getting started with the activity itself. So exercise involves like 100 gajillion little behaviors put together. And so it kind of like, I want to get good at basketball. Like, good Lord, that has a bunch of different things. Let's start with, like, can you catch the ball? Can you dribble? And that sort of conversation, I think, applies here too. Because when a person says they want to get motivated to exercise, well, maybe it means, like, what steps actually have to occur for exercise to happen? And then start maybe assessing those things a little bit. And you could, is funny enough, say, I want to get motivated to put my exercise shoes on.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can, I guess, in plain speak, get the domino rolling that way. Because really, if you think about what does exercise get you, it gets you a lot of amazing things, but those amazing things exercise get you come into severe delay.
Mm-hmm.
And the further out that delay, the lower the value of the thing. In other words, the motivation to perform the behavior goes down precipitously with respect to how long of a delay of the benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting on the couch has benefit right now. And so we end up fighting the couch sitting with respect to the exercising. The difference now between making sitting on the couch interesting and making exercise interesting with respect to each other, like, you have zero chance to make exercise more interesting. You can install what I call commitment devices. A commitment device really just means you eliminate alternatives. On the extreme end, the hardest commitment means removing an alternative completely. Like, well, if you sit on the couch too much and you exercise too little, if you made the couch vanish, then the probability of exercising goes up. And then you can just keep eliminating alternatives until you just have the white room with the black spot. That would become the hardest commitment possible. You also have social support, where you can go with somebody and they will pat you on the butt for going and you pat them on the butt, and then you have some social pressure involved. But that becomes actually a super fun and complicated, like, little analysis, and it kind of depends on the person. So sorry if I kind of went around in circles for a little bit there.
No, that's fine. What are the things that you see most often that get people to exercise when you have incoming clients?
Very good question. So I rely almost exclusively on what I call awareness. So a lot of people already have a great understanding that exercise helps you with even if they just know that. A lot of people just, exercise is good. Nobody really questions that at all. Making that relevant to daily life becomes difficult. But when somebody first comes in, I immediately make the suggestion that they just start keeping track of what they currently do. And when somebody actually sees in real time how little exercise they get compared to exercise is good, yeah, I'll get to it later, versus actually seeing a measurement showing how little exercise actually occurs, that does end up motivating, that makes the value of the exercise activity or the outcome of exercise activity go up. Even if temporary, right? Motivation, I think, inherently has transitory properties. So it'll get somebody riled up to get more active temporarily. And so I have the job of, like, one, can a person motivate themselves? And I rely on observing your own behavior as the primary method of motivating yourself. If you have an idea of what you want and you have an idea of what it takes to get it, well, then understanding the discrepancy between those things becomes the, like, step one to determining what to do next.
Yeah.
And when you have something in between what you do and what you get, each one of those steps serves as its own little mile marker that maintains motivation. In other words, like, if you do work with me and then you do go on a walk and then you tell me about it, I give you a high five. And so in the grand scheme of things, like, my high-fiving raises the probability of exercising again the next day. And so those little interactions actually maintain exercise motivation more than trying to make exercise motivating in and of itself, because it has such a long delay to getting a benefit. So the job of working with somebody, or my job with respect to working with somebody who may have, difficulties maintaining motivation with respect to exercise, I play that role of bridging the gap between exercising having too little value to matter at all day to day, to getting good enough at exercise that you do actually derive benefit. And then when you do derive real world benefit from the activity, then it can motivate itself at a much higher probability. As in, everything sucks until you get good at it. And when you get good at it, you like to do it. And that gap between starting and getting good gets tremendously wide. And frankly, a pat on the butt once in a while keeps you going, right? I think learning a sport or learning anything correlates to this very strongly, where when you first pick up a basketball and you go to shoot it and you miss, you might just give up forever. But if you have someone standing next to you going like, you got it closer than you did last time.
Totally.
Like, even now just saying that, like, kind of but that reinforcing outcome in the social domain maintains the behavior in the meantime, what people might call encouragement. I would call shaping behavior by differential reinforcement. Like, you got closer than before, I'll let you know. And if you like me and my opinion matters, then it'll keep you going. Until you do make a basket, and then when you make the basket making maintains your basketball playing.
Yeah.
All on its own.
And in the context of exercise and fitness, what we would consider getting better often are called results.
Yes. Yeah. In the business world, they say things like KPIs and depending on where you look. And I do a lot of preaching about, like, the more ways you can measure, the more ways you can win effectively. And I think that by and large separates a lot of, I would say, professionals from amateurs. That professional has a higher degree of resolution with respect to what looks like progress. And that if you talk to a person who has written 50 books, or I would say that sounds ridiculous, a person who's written 10 books to a person who has written 0 books, the idea of a person who has written 0 books before going to write a book sounds really daunting. And a person who's written 5 books before, it might sound exciting. You say, well, of course, he's written books. But that still raises the question of, like, well, what bridged that original gap and what keeps the motivation going for the writer? Because they understand that a sentence leads to a paragraph, and a paragraph leads to a page, and pages lead to chapters, and chapters leads to sections. And so that every sentence gets them closer to finishing the book, and that they have an idea of what it takes to finish. So they have that degree of resolution with respect to making progress. And for an amateur writing a book, they just see how much further of the book they have to go and that it feels like it'll never finish. And the professional has an idea of how much closer they have gotten.
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense.
And you know that as good as anybody, that like you, even if arbitrary, you have these boundaries that you set up so you have an idea of how much closer you've gotten to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And every step you get closer works as its own little reinforcing stimulus. And I think in behavior economics, they call it delay reduction stimuli. In other words, you know why people watch cookies bake? Because the scent gets stronger, because the cookies move, because like all these changes that occur, each change indicates getting closer to eating that cookie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why? And so I love that as the perfect example of like, I have a pizza cooker I cook little frozen pizzas on sometimes. And I have caught myself laughing because I just watch it and I stare at it cooking and it turns.
Cheese begins to.
Yeah. You see the changes occurring. And the changes occurring matter to me from an analytical perspective, insofar as each little change I see gets me that much closer to eating the pizza. And so when it comes to regulating your own behavior and motivating yourself or whatever, a lot of it comes down to, well, what sort of changes will occur from now and then that would indicate you've gotten closer? And a person with experience in a given domain, they can lay out those changes. They can lay out many more of them and do a much better job at seeing them when they occur and patting themselves on the back when they do. And so working with somebody like me, like on the bird's eye view, a lot of it looks like establishing those things so that you know what to do, when to do it, and most importantly, when you've done it correctly, because we all know that we have a pretty significant delay between doing the thing and getting the stuff. And things like weight loss kind of sit in between because your weight fluctuates day to day. And the weight fluctuating day to day definitely leads to behavior fluctuating day to day for the same exact reason. And you have your own set of sort of techniques to deal with the sawtooth issue going on, how you present data and things of that nature. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Absolutely. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, now I have a question. So we had a reader write in. They do shift work at non-traditional hours, and we'd had a text exchange years ago. I have no idea when it was, where we were just kind of going back and forth about how you work with a lot of people that have shift work. So I want to hear how you approach those clients. But first of all, what do you see as some of the potential downsides of shift work, just from a health perspective and behavioral perspective? I mean, just what comes to mind? It's vague.
Yeah, I would say that shift work in the plainest way possible kind of confuses your insides. And I'll just leave it there. I think the World Health Organization classifies shift work as a carcinogen. But basically when your sleep gets wonky, other things get wonky, and when that stuff gets wonky, the blah. I mean, like, shift work gets paid more per hour for a reason. And as an aside, I generally see income by and large, the largest lever of income by and large comes from the amount of risk a person takes. And obviously it depends on the domain, but the shift work gets paid more, okay, because it sucks, but also because it has inherent risk. And that risk also comes at a delay, the realizing that risk comes at a delay, much like smoking. And so I do see it as something that, like, how do I say this? If you do it long enough, it'll probably shave off the back end a little bit. And I think talking about circadian rhythms and signal transduction and all of that stuff, although it kind of sounds cool, it does very little to actually help the situation. So I will tell you that I have a lot of experience with shift workers. I would say particularly in the realm of firefighters and nurses. And then military gets kind of weird because they at least the guys I work with, they less did shift work and they more just did like, okay, we have to go now, bye, sorry, see you later type of work. And so they have crazy hours more than they have shifts. And so I will say shift work in particular has a lot of benefits because you do tend to have a schedule. Now, you might work midnight to 8 a.m. some days and 8 a.m. to midnight other days, but by and large, you have some regularity in the macro schedule, even if you have crazy deviations in your sleep schedule day to day. Does that sound fair to kind of set that assumption?
Yes.
Okay. So given that, I think maximizing health outcomes and fitness and etc., looking sexy, all those things, they kind of like separate and interrelated, that it means taking that schedule and looking at it very serious so that priority one, you just ask the question of, let's just start with food, for instance, because most of it will revolve around food from that perspective of you will have times where 7 days a week, when you overlap your schedule, you will have times during the day where you stay awake all 7 days. So that means laying out your schedule, you look at the times you sleep, you look at the times you work, and then you look at, okay, what times during the day do I stay awake for all 7 days in a row? That will occur. I can almost guarantee that will occur. Okay? That you probably have overlapping waking hours between all of your days. Geez. Okay. Those become your main targets to eat. If I just said, that becomes like basically the 90-10 of all of this with respect to how I do it. You just look across your week. You look for regularity in waking hours and free time, mostly waking hours, and then you schedule a lot of your health-related inputs, outputs, exercise, and eating, and ideally light exposure with respect to those times during the day, and that will help keep you synced up.
Okay.
Like, can you get it perfect? Maybe. I know some people have done their darndest and their health records showed accordingly. But by and large, if you just think of this as like you as a shift worker have awkward and less free time compared to other people with respect to, the regularity in it, of the hours you stay awake on the most days in a row, ideally all the days, you pack in your nutrition and ideally your exercise during that time if you can. And so that you can get regular times you eat and regular times you move. The movement, I think, matters less. The eating matters the most. Light exposure, I do think, matters to some degree, and you can generate that artificially anyway. So I would say that I saw the most benefits from overall health markers. Even if they ate the same stuff, they just changed the times that they ate it to match on a day-to-day basis.
That's interesting.
As in like measurable differences in health markers. Now, obviously, when you combine that with moderate exercise and a little bit of body composition change, then you have reductions in body fat, visceral fat, etc., that further improves health markers. So it ends up becoming that virtuous cycle of how do you stay motivated? Because then you also have now the main belief that becomes difficult to overcome for me or anybody else in shift work becomes like, I just have a crazy schedule. I don't have anything regular. And rule one, just like sit down and like really pay attention to just really map it all out. And you will find regularity, I promise. You will find it. And it takes very little. I mean, and frankly, it can mean 30 minutes a day, whatever. Okay? And even just maintaining regular behaviors across all 7 days of the week. I mean, almost anything will, especially with regard to health behaviors, but with respect to eating, that alone will make a tremendous difference in your health markers by and large. And I feel confident in saying that again, mostly because it forces us to pay attention to what we do. And when we pay attention to what we do, we see the differences between what we do and what we had best to do. And so long as we maintain that level of awareness, we will keep inching towards closing that gap, right? It becomes a feedback apparatus. So once you figure out all the times you could possibly eat during the day, all 7 days a week that match, body fat loss almost just occurs on its own, just by virtue of regulating what you eat or when you eat. That will almost always regulate how much.
Yeah.
Otherwise, when we eat willy-nilly, we gain fat willy-nilly. Like people would say, well, I just get it when I can. And that sort of rule that you make for yourself really handicaps any sort of progress you can make. Because it really just becomes permission, for better or worse, to act willy-nilly about the sort of health behaviors you want to improve. And so that means installing that commitment apparatus that we spoke about a minute ago of like, well, if I arrange the environment so that food becomes available at these times, well, that will establish a little bit of food deprivation in the meantime, making food extra valuable when it becomes available. Mm-hmm. So it becomes, a little bit of an awkward period to make changes, but creating that routine of I can eat at the same time every day, the next question becomes, well, how much do I eat and what? And things end up snowballing very well from there once we get over that initial hump of scheduling. And sometimes a lot of these awkward jobs, like maybe it means you just take a break during that time. Again, like weird stuff happens, but over a few weeks, every single person I've ever worked with, minus the military guys that just have to like vanish and jump out of an airplane for a weekend, have a way to manage, I would say, within 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Make the meal schedule. And for some people, that means maybe they only eat twice. Some people can eat 3 times. So in that case, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's gonna take care of the vast majority of issues that could pop up. Or rather, it solves for a lot of issues in itself.
Yes. So bird's eye view, it really again, we can talk about like the circadian rhythm stuff. I prefer not to. I've tried to put my shoes in the person. I try to put myself in the shoes of the person. We're like, my God, just some regularity,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
like just having something regular, and then when food timing becomes regular, food amounts become regular, food choices become regular. Mood becomes regular, and when mood regulates, all sorts of other, silly behaviors that we might emit on account of crummy moods go down in probability as well. And life generally just gets better. And I just see the ball and chain of like, I just have a crazy schedule, nothing's regular. And so I immediately just like home in with extreme violence on that sort of language. Because nobody stands a chance.
Right.
Nobody stands a chance. If they say I want to do it and I can't do it, like how do we do something like this?
Mm.
So that becomes a bulk of the labor. Once we can establish some form of regularity, the domino has fallen.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love it.
Yeah.